Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on The Conversation. Now, African businesses are increasingly turning away from the U.S. market due to President Trump's trade policies and the potential non-renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, that's AGOA. Now, as a result, many African brands are seeking more stable trade partnerships. China is emerging as a key beneficiary of this shift, with a projected 40% surge in Chinese investments in Africa by 2025. To discuss further on this, I'm joined by Ryder. She's an economist and CEO, Development Reimagined in Shanghai, China. Thank you so much for joining us on The Conversation, Anna.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, since Trump's new trade policies hit the market, AGOA's future has been uncertain. How do you see Africa's long-standing trade relationship with the U.S. evolving?
Yes. Well, as you know, AGOA was created in the year 2000. It took a lot of effort from the U.S. and also African countries at the time in the World Trade Organization to agree this preferential scheme, and it was groundbreaking at the time because it covered both low-income and middle-income countries. And previously, the World Trade Organization had only allowed preferences for low-income countries. So it was groundbreaking, and the U.S. managed it in partnership with African countries. And here we are 25 years later, and unfortunately the record of the AGOA has been, I would say, less than exciting. Over the period 2011 to 2023, U.S. trade with Africa actually dropped by 35%. And if we look at specifically at exports from African countries to the U.S., which is, what many African countries are obviously trying to achieve, those stand at around 39 billion. We can compare that to the exports of African countries to China, which is 117 billion. So you can see there's a significant difference, and unfortunately, in a sense, because of the perhaps the lack of intentionality around really trying to make AGOA work more strongly for African countries, then it has not delivered as many benefits as it should. And also now with this new policy, we have more uncertainty, and it means that African brands, African firms need to be thinking even more strategically around how to expand their products and make sure that they still have strong markets for their product.
So you are also of the opinion that China is fast becoming the preferred alternative for trade partnerships with African countries?
Well, I wouldn't say the preferred partner at this point. I think what African firms and governments who are promoting trade and investment with others, what they're trying to do is to make sure that it is a strong partnership. I think it is an increasingly strong partnership, and I think that has also been particularly because also since the year 2000, there has been the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which has included a lot of different trade measures. So not just preferential schemes, including for low-income countries only. There's no preferential trade schemes between China and middle-income countries. But what China has done is worked perhaps more intentionally to find ways of opening up the market with avoiding non-tariff barriers, things like standards and so on, which actually tend to keep out our products rather than enable them to flow into these markets. So I think it's not necessarily a preferred partner, but a partner that African countries and firms are really significantly more interested in. There's also changes in China itself, which means that China is a very different economy even from 2000 than it is today. And so, or even 5 years ago, many African countries were not really looking, many brands were not looking to China as this kind of market. But today, looking at the modernization that's happened in China, the increasing large consumer market, the rise of the middle class and upper class in China, these have really meant that the consumer market and the luxury market in particular is now as attractive, if not more attractive, as European and American markets.
All right. Now, Anna, new forecasts, suggest China's GDP could take over the U.S. by 2030, with growth in key sectors rising from 6% to nearly 8%. Now, in your view, which key sectors are positioned to lead this particular change?
So within China, the effort at the moment is really to enable more private sector growth in the most innovative sectors, the high-tech sectors, of course, and also to try to move the economy from being a highly manufacturing-based economy to a consumption-based economy. So we already see the rise of, for instance, domestic tourism, the service sector, as well as the high-tech sector. We hear all about the high-tech sector internationally because that's where a lot of the competition is, in areas like smart development or electric vehicles, renewable energy, and so on. But that is part of the story. It's also in the service sector where there's going to be significant growth, and that's what the government is aiming for here in China. And that itself provides an opportunity because when you have the service sector growing, you also have consumption growing, and perhaps more bespoke consumption. What you have with the markets here is that the Chinese consumers are increasingly looking for products which are more sustainable. They're looking for products which have a unique story. And for example, that's how some of our key sectors like agricultural products or fashion products can really fit into this market and have started to see significant growth recently.
All right. Now, I would actually want you to, explain further when you talk about, fashion products, coming forward and also taking over, if you don't mind.
Yes. Well, we have seen we've seen an increase in growth in the fashion, textiles and apparel sector here in China. One of the things we, as a firm, have done in China is to create a platform for African brands to come to China to showcase their fashion. In fact, the reason I'm dialing in from Shanghai rather than Beijing, where my firm is based, is because in Shanghai right now is the Shanghai Fashion Week, where we have 22 African fashion brands showcasing their products for the first time. And the reception has been absolutely incredible. This is a very new thing for Shanghai Fashion Week. They haven't had African brands here before, and it is the fourth largest fashion week in the world, but not as well known as Paris and Milan and New York. But of course, the impact, and I said because of this large consumer market, can be just as strong, if not stronger, for our African brands. So this is why we've created this opportunity, and we see our brands really taking this chance and opportunity to act as a result.
Well, while this is all very interesting and optimistic, so many people or so many critics are actually asking if this would in turn bring stability for African economies. That's partnering with China. Will it bring stability for African economies, or will it introduce new risks?
Well, I think one of the aspects about the relationship with China, we do have a very strong trade. Many of our countries have a very strong trade deficit with China. Nigeria, for example, it's a 13-to-1 trade deficit. So we import, for every dollar that we export, we import $13 worth back. And of course, there's a lot of African consumers and producers who are concerned about that. And I think rightly so. At the same time, that pattern is not unique. We do have trade deficits with many other countries. So it's not just a China issue. It's actually to do with our production methods and our lack of productive capacity. So I think one of the reasons also why we have focused on fashion, for instance, and value-added products is because we want to make sure, and I think it's important, that African brands and players entering the Chinese market really showcase that high quality production is possible on the African continent, that made in Africa looks good, is good. And so therefore we can try to also, at the same time as promoting trade, also promote our continent and our countries as an investment destination. And I think this is the key trick. And I think it's something that, a number of organizations, a number of banks, for example, Afrexim Bank, who are actually the key sponsor for this program that we're managing, they have been investing in the creative sector across the continent. But what they try to do is make the link, and we make this link to the productive economy. It's not just about the creative sector. It's about then increasing manufacturing. It's about increasing the employment in these sectors and thereby stimulating extra economic growth. But as I said, we have to be intentional about it. We can't just sit back and wait for these things to happen. If we do that, those trade deficits will only get wider because really China has a lot of advantages.
Well, you talked about not sitting down, and waiting for things to happen. What is your organization currently doing to bring all of this to fruition?
Well, as I said, working with partners like Afrexim Bank and Shanghai Fashion Week, for example, one step we're taking is to have this trade platform to help African brands find new buyers and sellers in the Chinese market. And as I said, the response has been really, really positive. It's not just that, though, because what we're also trying to do is to, again, inspire these brands around how China itself, how it ecosystem works, how the different business model works. Commerce in China works extremely fast and efficiently. So thinking about how can we replicate some of these models, how can we utilize these options in order to help our economies grow even faster.
All right, now further analysis actually emphasizes the need for diversification in a post-AGOA era. What immediate policy actions should African governments, take to capitalize on these new opportunities with China?
Yeah. We definitely have to diversify. There is a real risk that AGOA will not be renewed. There was that risk even in the Biden administration, the previous administration, and had Kamala Harris gone forward as the president of the United States, there would still have been that risk. But there is an even stronger possibility that it may not go forward now, because really the focus from the new administration in the US is around sticks rather than carrots, shall we say, and AGOA has been more of a carrot in some ways, in many ways. That said, I think we have to diversify in several directions. So looking to new markets like China, and I would say also some others in Asia. I mean, again, we're here in Shanghai, and Shanghai Fashion Week itself positions itself as a gateway to the rest of Asia. So even, there are some fashion shows in Thailand and Singapore and Malaysia and so on. So there's opportunities there in those markets as well. But we also have to diversify, not just also looking outside, but we need to also diversify in terms of our own African markets. And I think this is where the African Continental Free Trade Area comes in. We should really try to really utilize that as quickly as possible. The textile and apparel sector, along with the vehicle sector, logistics, and the agricultural processing sector are key priorities for the AFCFTA. And so our governments should absolutely channel support as much as possible into those four sectors and really be very intentional around trying to find new opportunities, not just internationally, but also on the continent.
Oh, well, Anna, I don't mean to be, negative at this point, but if this major trade realignment isn't managed properly, what immediate fallout could African exporters experience in today's volatile global market?
I think it's fair that you should, talk about risks as well as opportunities. Our exports to other countries are very important. Our exports to the US, as I mentioned, account for almost 40 billion US dollars. So any impact to those exports will have significant have significant resonating effects. And of course, realignment in terms of imports, and if there are tariffs on some of the products, if we also start to put tariffs on products coming into our countries, of course, then we will also face increasing inflation as well. And that will also be very challenging for us. So if we're in a general international inflationary environment, typically as African economies, we have faced the brunt of that, even though usually takes a longer time to feed through to our economies. So the time is now to be diversifying. The time is now to be thinking actively about these risks. The time is now, for African brands already in the US market or even in other markets such as Europe. They really do need to be taking these issues seriously and to see how they can find ways of growing other options while still doing their best to work through the extra cost of their products that will be faced by consumers if there are reductions in AGOA or new tariffs imposed.
All right, now while we wrap up this conversation, Anna, I would love to hear your final thoughts and also how you feel smaller African economies can shield themselves from the ripple effects, of major trade disputes, while also preserving their economic sovereignty.
Yeah. Again, this is really crucial. And again, we have to remember that when we're talking about AGOA, although it is it was introduced as a sort of a development scheme, as I said, it does include low-income and middle-income countries, and I think that's right in many ways, because fundamentally the vast, especially value-added and manufactured products, those will be in our middle-income countries, and we should be creating space for our middle-income countries and to export manufactured products to other countries. At the same time, almost 70% of African exports to the US are dominated by 5 countries. That's South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Morocco, and Kenya. So for the rest of the 30%, that's a very small amount to be distributed across a large number of countries. And so it means that not that many countries are necessarily benefiting from this preferential trade scheme. So again, this is where the African Continental Free Trade Area comes in. It's where this idea of working across the continent to create supply chains on the continent. It's why the focus on logistics is so important in the AFCFTA. Why it's also so important, for example, to partner with banks and the African Development Bank, Afro-Exim Bank, AFC, who invest in infrastructure, in logistics, in special economic zones. All of these will add to our productive capability, and they can also bring in low-income countries, because if we have, for example, cross-border infrastructure, typically that will go across low-income countries and therefore enable them to benefit more from these sorts of schemes, or at least shield themselves from the risk of these schemes going away or of increased tariffs or increased inflationary environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these are the sorts of ideas that need to be brought in.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for your thoughts and also for speaking to us on this topic. Anna Ryder, economist and CEO, Development Reimagined in Shanghai, China. We appreciate you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.